A black woman walked into a federal courthouse, calm, confident. She wasn't loud. She wasn't dramatic. She was just there to do her job. But in a place where power had long been divided by race, they didn't treat her with respect. They stripped her of her dignity. They dragged her into a room, mocked her, and cut off her iconic hair. But what they didn't know was they had picked the wrong woman, because she wasn't just a visitor. She wasn't even a defendant. She was a powerful judge. And when she rose from that chair, she didn't just take back control, she rewrote the system that had tried to bury her. What followed was a storm of reckoning and a courtroom revolution that upended every expectation of the racist. Before we continue, we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Are you tuning in from a busy city, a quiet town, or somewhere in between? Drop your location in the comments below and share your thoughts with us. What part of this story spoke to you the most? And while you're here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss another powerful, thought-provoking story like this one. We're building a global community of listeners, learners, and change makers, and you're an important part of it. Let's grow together, one story at a time. It started like any other morning in Grantville, Georgia, a town where the Spanish moss hung low and the courthouse stood tall, like a monument to order. The sky was clear, the breeze faint, and the town square stirred slowly to life as street vendors prepared their booths, and the scent of brewed coffee lingered in the air. Judge Amara Whitmore pulled into the staff parking lot just after 8:00 a.m., her silver Honda Accord humming softly as she cut the engine. She took a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, then exhaled, steady and slow. This day was important. She was scheduled to preside over a high-profile hearing involving allegations of police brutality during last year's Freedom March, an incident that left a teenage protester in critical condition. The press would be watching, activists would be present, and across the aisle, a defense stacked with polished attorneys ready to spin, stall, and silence. But none of that fazed her. She adjusted the collar of her charcoal blazer, grabbed the leather case on the passenger seat, and stepped out, her low heels clicking against the pavement in quiet resolve. She didn't wear her judicial robe outside the courtroom. She never had. She preferred to walk in like a citizen, a woman, a witness, not a symbol. The courthouse steps rose ahead like a slow climb toward judgment. The morning sun glinted off the glass entrance. She passed two clerks chatting idly who didn't recognize her without the robe or the title. That was common. Amara had long since grown used to invisibility until she spoke. Then the room always remembered who she was. At the security checkpoint, the air changed. Deputy Marshal Conrad Hale, a man built like a cement wall and with the temperament of one, eyed her from behind the scanner. His square jaw twitched slightly as she approached. He didn't recognize her. More importantly, he didn't try. His voice came sharp. "Hold up," he said, raising a gloved hand. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of line." Amara paused, not in fear, but in calculation. "Is there a reason, officer?" she asked calmly. Hale didn't answer. His eyes raked over her silver curls, her dark skin, the professional composure she wore like a second skin. Something about her irritated him. She looked like she belonged here. And in his world, women like her needed to be reminded who really held the keys. "You don't have credentials visible," he muttered, already stepping forward. Amara reached into her blazer, produced the ID, and handed it over. It caught the sunlight gold lettering shimmering United States District Judge. He barely glanced at it before sliding it into his pocket. She raised an eyebrow. "I'd like that returned," she said evenly. He leaned in, closer than necessary, breath sour tone mocking. "In a hurry to get somewhere, sweetheart." The word landed like a slap. Behind him, a young security officer, a black woman no older than 22, shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Amara straightened. "I have a courtroom to reach," she said, voice still cool. "Then you'll follow my procedure," Hale snapped, "and that includes secondary screening." He didn't wait for consent. His hand wrapped around her upper arm with practiced force, steering her out of the line and into a narrow hallway off to the side. It was windowless, cold, sterile. The kind of room designed not for transparency, but control. A steel chair sat in the center. A rolling tray with scanning equipment stood idle beside it. A pair of clippers rested on the edge, too casual to be accidental. Amara stopped short. Her chest rose once, then settled. "I do not consent to this," she said clearly. "You have no legal basis to detain me." Hale's face didn't shift. "Acting suspicious is basis enough," he said. "Now sit." She didn't move. He took a step forward. "You think that badge you flashed means something not in this room? Not to me." The door creaked open behind her. Two more deputies entered, one tall and bald, the other shorter, with nervous eyes, and a name tag that read D. Mason. They flanked her without a word. "You're violating protocol," she said firmly. "And my rights." Hale scoffed. "You could be hiding anything in that mop." He gestured at her carefully twisted curls. Standard precaution. The clippers buzzed to life with a mechanical hum that filled the space like a threat. Before she could shift, two hands pressed down on her shoulders. She clenched her jaw. Then the cold edge met her scalp. One coil of silver fell, then another. Her breath caught, but she didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't even blink. She sat as pieces of herself were stripped away, strand by strand, her dignity falling to the tiled floor, piling in small, quiet mounds. One of the deputies chuckled. "Clean look suits you," he muttered. "Should have shown some respect walking in." Amara's fist trembled in her lap, her skin stretched white over her knuckles. But her voice, when it returned, was steel. "You'll regret this," she said. Hale leaned close, smirking. "People like you always say that." And just like that, it was over. He tossed the clippers back on the tray and opened the door. "You're free to go," he said casually. "Courtroom's that way." Amara rose slowly. She retrieved her badge from his desk without asking. Her legs moved with eerie calm, her posture unbroken, but inside her chest, something burned, not rage, not yet, but a precision hotter than fury. A promise, because what Hale didn't know, what none of them knew, was that she wasn't here to observe, to plead, or to be judged. She was here to take her seat. She was the judge. And that courtroom, it wouldn't know what hit it. The echoes of the clippers still buzzed in Judge Amara Whitmore's ears as she walked the long marble corridor toward courtroom 2C. Her scalp tingled where the cold blades had stolen what took years to grow silver coils shaped by heritage, by patience, by identity. Now, only uneven tufts remained, a raw patch near her left temple, pulsing with every step. But her stride didn't falter. Her hands, though trembling slightly, clutched her briefcase with intention. And her eyes were fire and ice focused on the heavy wooden doors ahead. The hallway was strangely quiet for a Monday. Clerks who usually bustled now avoided her gaze. Two security officers passed by without a word, one of them recognizing her too late and freezing mid-step guilt flickering across his face before quickly vanishing. Amara didn't pause. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Beyond those doors was the courtroom she had presided over for 7 years. On the docket, Langston v. City of Grantville, a federal case involving allegations of excessive force during a peaceful protest where a 17-year-old boy had been tackled and choked by police. The room was already full press, seated in the back rows, attorneys rustling through binders, the Langston family quiet on the plaintiff's side. She was expected to enter through the judge's chamber's robe, press decorum intact. But this morning, that protocol no longer mattered. She stopped just outside the door. Her fingers grazed the edges of the half-healed scrape on her scalp. Then she took a deep breath and pushed both doors open. The room stilled instantly. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned, mouths parted, and then recognition rippled like a wave hitting concrete. A few reporters stood up without realizing. Some stared in disbelief, others squinted confused. They had seen the woman led through security minutes earlier, the one with hair on the floor and dignity under assault. They had assumed she was a defendant, a bystander, someone lesser. They hadn't known they were watching a judge rise from humiliation, until now. Her heels echoed sharply as she walked past the rows. Eyes followed her wide and wary. Whispers curled through the gallery like smoke. She ignored them all. At the front, behind the bench, her chair stood empty, waiting. And when she stepped behind it, there was no mistaking it anymore. Judge Amara Whitmore didn't sit. She ascended. Slowly, deliberately, she reached for the robe folded over the chair. No clerk assisted. No ceremony performed. She lifted it herself, slipped each sleeve over her trembling arms, and fastened the front. It settled over her shoulders, not like cloth, but like armor. Then, without hesitation, she turned to the courtroom clerk. "Is the docket ready?" Her voice was low but unwavering. The clerk, young, pale lips pressed tight, nodded, voice cracking. "Yes, Your Honor." Amara nodded once, then lowered herself into the bench. The leather groaned beneath her, the sound strangely human. The bailiff, standing by the side door, went still as a stone. It was Conrad Hale, the same man who had wielded the clippers like a weapon less than an hour ago. When their eyes met, something in him broke. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared, his skin drained of color. Amara didn't flinch. She didn't look away. But she didn't acknowledge him either. Not yet. Instead, she turned forward and addressed the room as if nothing had happened. We will begin with preliminary testimony on Case 0143, G. Langston v. City of Grantville. Allegations include excessive force, abuse of power, and civil rights violations. Are all parties present? A murmur of yes. Your Honor answered. Some voices were firm, others hollow, several tight with disbelief. The attorneys at the defense table shifted uneasily. One, a man in his late 40s with a pinstripe suit and a practiced smirk, looked as if he had just swallowed broken glass. The prosecution prepared to call the first witness. Judge Whitmore leaned back slightly, hands folded neatly before her, the collar of her robe brushing against the rawness at the base of her neck. She gave no sign of pain, no indication of what had been taken from her earlier. The courtroom belonged to her now, not by force but by presence. From the rear of the courtroom, Hale's hands twitched at his belt. His legs shifted restlessly. He looked like he wanted to vanish. He wouldn't get the chance, because today was no longer about the case alone. It was about truth, exposure, reckoning. Amara let her gaze linger on the witness stand, then on the attorneys, then finally briefly on Hale. He blinked and took a half step backward. The look she gave him wasn't hate. It was worse. It was recognition. The kind that said, I see you now. And I'll make sure the world does too. The first witness took the stand. Judge Whitmore straightened in her seat. Her gavel rested untouched. The court was in session. But what had truly begun was something larger, heavier, unrelenting. Justice not as performance, but as resistance. The witness stand creaked as David Langston, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 40s with weathered hands and a salt and pepper beard, adjusted the microphone. His suit was slightly wrinkled like he'd been sitting in it too long, and his voice, when it came, was deep but cracked around the edges. My son, Jordan Langston, was 17 years old. He began, eyes fixed on no one, just the space ahead of him like it held the memory. He was a good kid, played the trumpet, worked weekends at the food pantry. He went to the protest that day to march. Not to fight, not to start trouble, just to march. Across the courtroom, the defense attorney scribbled something down, but didn't interrupt. The jury pool sat unnaturally still. Judge Amara Whitmore listened without moving, her eyes fixed on Langston's face, her hands laced tightly together on the bench. Behind her, Hale hadn't moved. He was still at his post by the side door, but now his stance had changed, shoulders tight, feet restless. Every word Langston spoke made him flinch just barely, but enough. David continued. The protest was peaceful. Until the police line shifted forward, they said the crowd was non-compliant. That's what the report says. He looked at the defense table, then down at his lap. But we were moving. We were backing up like they told us. And then I heard the scream. His voice hitched. I turned around and I saw him, my son, face down on the pavement with a knee in his back and another pressing into his neck. He wasn't moving. He wasn't talking. Just gasping. There was a beat of silence. Then another. A reporter near the back of the gallery lowered her pen. The Langston family seated behind the bar held each other's hands, silent but trembling. We begged for paramedics, David said quietly. We were told he was faking, that he was resisting. They zip-tied him while he was unconscious. Amara's gaze didn't shift, but her jaw clenched. The prosecutor gave David a moment, then asked gently, "And what happened next, Mr. Langston?" David exhaled. He spent 9 days in the hospital. Crushed trachea, internal bruising. He still can't speak above a whisper. He leaned closer to the mic. And not a single officer was suspended. Not one. The prosecutor nodded, then said, "No further questions." Judge Whitmore thanked the witness and watched as he stepped down. He didn't look back at the defense table. He didn't look at Hale. He just walked slow and heavy past the rows of silent observers and out of sight. A new name was called, and a young woman stood up from the gallery, nervous, slight, holding her phone like it was armor. She walked to the stand, and as she sat down, the courtroom realized who she was. Lena Rojas, a first-year law intern assigned to the federal court. Barely 21, with large glasses and long dark hair tied back in a trembling braid, Lena adjusted the mic with shaky fingers. She looked once at Amara, then at the prosecutor. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth?" The oath was completed. She nodded. "Miss Rojas," the prosecutor began, "you're currently interning at this courthouse, correct?" "Yes, ma'am." Lena said, voice small. Have you had interactions with Deputy Marshal Hale during your time here? Lena's hands tightened around her phone. Yes, he often checks us in at security. He makes comments sometimes about how we dress or how we talk too much if we speak Spanish in the hallway. She hesitated. Most of us just ignore it. Amara leaned forward slightly. Miss Rojas, she said, her voice calm but cutting through the stillness. What happened this morning? Lena's eyes welled. I was going through the security line. I was behind you. She swallowed. I saw what he did. I saw him grab you. And I recorded it. The room froze. The defense team stiffened. The gallery rippled like the air had shifted. You have the footage, the prosecutor asked. Yes. She turned her phone toward the clerk, who quickly approached and retrieved it. I didn't know if I should do anything. I was scared, but I couldn't pretend I didn't see it. Judge Whitmore didn't move for a moment. Then she said softly, Thank you, Miss Rojas. That matters. Lena blinked, stunned. If you need me to testify more formally, she said, or if this becomes part of another case, I'm willing. She looked right at Amara. What he did, it wasn't just wrong. It was targeted, deliberate. Amara nodded once. Your courage is noted and recorded. The court clerk downloaded the footage to a secure device and confirmed it would be entered into the record. Judge Whitmore leaned back slightly, tapping her pen once against the edge of her bench. Then she spoke not to the attorneys, not to the room, but directly to Hale. Deputy Marshal Hale, she said. He straightened, startled. You are relieved of duty effective immediately. You will remain in the building under observation until a formal statement is taken. You are not to leave the premises, interfere with witnesses, or approach the bench again without authorization. Hale opened his mouth, but no words came out. She didn't give him the chance to find them. Then she turned back to the room. This court will take a 15-minute recess. The gavel struck once. The room exhaled. As Amara rose from her chair, the sound of shuffling feet filled the gallery. But no one whispered, no one murmured, because something had shifted undeniably. What had begun as testimony had become a confession of culture of rot beneath the marble. And now, in the silence that followed, the truth had its first foothold. Judge Whitmore stepped into her chambers alone. Behind her, Lena Rojas stood taller than she had minutes before. And somewhere deep in the heart of the courthouse, Conrad Hale finally understood that this time his silence would not save him. The 15-minute recess stretched into 20 as murmurs echoed through the marble halls, not loud, not chaotic, just charged like static before lightning. When the courtroom reconvened, a palpable tension hung in the air. The gallery had filled, even more word spreading fast, that something had happened, not just the hearing, but the exposure. The bailiff's seat was now occupied by a temporary replacement, a young officer named Reyes, tight-lipped and wide-eyed, clearly aware he was standing in the blast radius of something far larger than procedure. Hale was gone, escorted quietly out through the service corridor, and though no one announced it, everyone knew. The weight of his absence spoke louder than any removal order. Judge Amara Whitmore returned to the bench with her robe sitting heavier than before. Not because it was literal weight, but because it now bore the expectations of a courtroom that had just seen silence rupture and truth begin to bleed through the cracks. She tapped the gavel once. Call the next witness. The prosecutor nodded and motioned toward the rear doors. From the left side of the room, a woman stood tall, poised, dressed in a neat gray suit that had seen better days, but still carried dignity in every crease. Her name was Mrs. Evelyn Barnes. 56 years old, black, with cropped silver hair and glasses that slid down her nose when she was nervous. She wasn't nervous now. She walked like a woman who had waited years for this moment and wasn't about to let it pass her by. She swore in with no hesitation, took the stand, adjusted the microphone, and folded her hands in her lap. Mrs. Barnes, the prosecutor began. Can you state your previous position within the Grantville Federal Courthouse? I was the records compliance officer. She replied, voice clear. From 2009 until last year. And can you tell us what your responsibilities included? I was responsible for logging formal complaints, tracking internal reports, and ensuring those records were properly archived and escalated as needed, she said. I also trained new staff on intake protocols and monitored repeat violations by personnel. Judge Whitmore didn't move, but her eyes sharpened. Were you ever made aware of complaints regarding Deputy Marshal Conrad Hale? The question came from the prosecutor, but it landed like thunder. Evelyn nodded. Yes, she said simply. At least 16 formal complaints crossed my desk during my tenure. 12 were filed directly. 4 were escalated from staff referrals or witness statements. And what happened to those complaints, the prosecutor asked. Evelyn hesitated for the first time, not out of fear, but because saying it aloud was like exhaling poison. They were marked as unsubstantiated, every single one. Most of them never made it past review. Who reviewed them? Evelyn's jaw clenched. Judge Jeremiah Collins, she said. He signed off on all but one. The name dropped like a stone into still water. Collins, a former chief judge, revered, retired 6 months ago with accolades and a standing ovation. A man Amara once stood beside during ceremonies. A mentor, a gatekeeper, and now a shield for silence. The prosecutor approached the bench. "Your Honor, permission to introduce Exhibit 7A into the record," she said. A memo submitted to court archives in 2017, signed by Judge Collins, and addressed to then Chief of Security. Amara nodded. The document appeared on the overhead projector. The words burned in black and white. Deputy Hale is firm but effective. Rough around the edges but necessary for maintaining order with certain elements. Let's not escalate minor friction into public controversy. The phrase certain elements seemed to pulse on the screen. The room didn't gasp. It seethed quietly. Amara leaned forward, voice controlled. "Mrs. Barnes, did you object to this pattern of suppression during your tenure?" Evelyn looked right at her. "Yes, Your Honor." Repeatedly. "I raised concerns internally. I submitted follow-up reports. I was told she swallowed. I was told not to rock the structure." That too much visibility would erode community trust. Amara's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of her bench. That phrase, community trust. She had heard it before. Used to justify delay. Used to bury pain. Used to trade justice for convenience. She sat back. "Thank you, Mrs. Barnes. This court appreciates your testimony." Evelyn didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just nodded like a soldier finally discharged from a battle she never chose. As Evelyn stepped down, a clerk entered the courtroom quietly and approached the bench with a sealed envelope. Amara opened it, eyes scanning the contents. Then she addressed the room. "This court has received corroborating internal communications indicating that suppression of misconduct reports involving Deputy Marshal Hale were systemic and documented as early as 2011. These documents will be entered into the record." From the defense table, Attorney Milton Sharp stood abruptly. Late 50s, polished, with a voice that had surely made cable news appearances. He adjusted his tie like it was a weapon. "Your Honor, given the revelation of Judge Collins' involvement and the escalation of this hearing beyond its intended scope, the defense respectfully moves to dismiss the current witness sequence until proper review can be—" Amara cut him off, voice cold as glass. "Denied." He blinked. "Your Honor, I must protest. Sit down," she said, not loudly, but with the kind of authority that didn't allow for argument. He sat. Outside, the sound of sirens could be heard faintly. Not emergency crowd control. Word was spreading fast. Protesters were gathering. Reporters from Atlanta and Savannah had arrived. Social media feeds were already labeling the hearing with hashtags like #Justice in Grantville and #the Judge Who Stood. Inside the ceiling, fans hummed louder as if the building itself were holding its breath. Judge Whitmore rose slightly from her bench, speaking not to any single person, but to the courtroom itself. "Let the record show that this court does not fear exposure, it does not fear inquiry, and it will not participate in the preservation of injustice under the guise of order." She turned to the clerk. "We will recess for 30 minutes. All counsel remain available. Staff prepare a new docket inclusion based on the submitted documents." The gavel struck again, but no one moved right away, because now they knew. This wasn't just about one marshal or even one judge. This was about the rot that had been painted over for years and was now leaking through the walls. And Judge Amara Whitmore wasn't sealing the cracks. She was tearing down the plaster brick by brick. By the time the 30-minute recess ended, the courthouse no longer felt like a courthouse. It felt like a pressure valve seconds before rupture. Outside, the usually quiet steps of the Grantville Federal Courthouse were now covered in people, citizens, clergy students, elders, activists, survivors. Some held signs. Others just stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the doors like something sacred was unfolding inside. Camera crews set up in a crescent around the building, their lights blinking red with anticipation. On social media, the footage from Lena Rojas's phone had already gone viral. The hashtags had doubled. #Judge Whitmore, #exposed in Grantville, #she did not flinch. The world was watching now, not for the case itself, but for what it had become a reckoning years in the making. Inside, the energy had changed. The air was thicker, heavier, but it wasn't dread. It was something else: focus, resolve. Judge Amara Whitmore returned to the bench with a stillness that didn't ask for attention. It demanded it. Her eyes swept the room and then landed on a familiar face just inside the side door. Reverend Calvin Moore, 62, broad-shouldered, dark-skinned, with a salt-gray beard and the kind of deep-set eyes that saw everything and missed nothing, stood waiting with a small nod of acknowledgement. The clerk stepped toward the bench, whispering, "He asked to speak with you privately, Your Honor. He says it's important." Amara glanced back toward the nearly full courtroom, then toward the growing file of sealed evidence on her desk, then nodded once. "Bring him forward." Calvin stepped through the courtroom in silence, his boots echoing softly against the tile. He wore a faded black suit and a deep purple tie that had probably graced more funerals than weddings. His hand carried a thin folder, no thicker than 10 pages, but the way he held it made it feel like it contained ghosts. When he reached the bench, he didn't speak right away. He just looked at Amara, the weight of decades behind his gaze. "Judge Whitmore," he said, voice like gravel warmed by sun. "I won't take more than a minute. I just want you to know, we're out there, watching, not because we doubt you, but because we've been waiting for someone to do what you're doing now." He offered the folder. She took it, opening it slowly, carefully. Inside were 6 handwritten statements: victims, survivors, people who had faced Deputy Hale and others like him but had never been called to testify. Some were from years ago. One was dated just last month. Each one was signed, dated, and included a phone number and a promise: "I'm ready now if you want my story." Amara closed the folder, lips pressed tight. "How many more are there?" she asked. "More than you'd believe," Calvin said. "Some of them have stopped talking. Some never started. But the ones who saw you today, they're waking up." He paused. "You're not just leading a courtroom judge. You're leading the confession they never got to give." She didn't respond right away, just nodded once. And then, in a rare moment of release, she said softly, "Thank you, Reverend." Calvin nodded. "We see you," he said, "and we got your back." As he stepped away, Amara passed the folder to her clerk without a word. The clerk read the top page, eyes widening, then quickly moved to copy and log it. Amara returned her attention to the room. "This court is resuming session," she announced. "The following new testimonies will be reviewed, and if verified, added to the formal docket for cross-examination in the coming days." Before the gallery could fully react, a murmur rose near the back of the room. One woman, maybe late 60s, brown-skinned, with graying locks pulled back beneath a woven scarf, stood slowly. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "Your Honor," she said. Amara turned toward her. "Name and relation to the case." "My name is Lorraine Bixby," she said. "I came to watch, but I was also one of them. Hale hurt me, right in that same hallway. 10 years ago, the courtroom froze. No one breathed. He slammed me against the wall because I raised my voice after they dismissed my nephew's hearing. Told me I forgot my place. I filed a complaint." She looked around. "I still got the papers. Never heard back." Another hand rose, then another, then 10, 15. Quiet voices, men and women, old and young, each with a name, each with a memory, each with a silence that had finally met its end. Amara didn't try to stop them. She didn't interrupt or direct. She just let it unfold. One by one they spoke, not to indict, not to perform, but to unburden. A man in a mechanic's uniform, a former paralegal, a retired janitor, a mother whose son had been accused but never charged. And with each name, the courtroom shifted further from hearing to transformation. When the last voice fell silent, Amara looked out at the room, not as a judge presiding over witnesses, but as a woman witnessing a truth she had always known was buried beneath the stone. "Thank you," she said finally. "Your courage is not unnoticed, and it will not be unrecorded." She tapped her pen once, twice, then addressed the prosecution. "Prepare the necessary forms. These individuals will be entered as witnesses under protective status. Their statements will be preserved and reviewed for formal inclusion." From the defense table, Milton Sharp stood again, slower this time. "Your Honor," he said, his voice tight, "surely you must see this hearing is being tainted by emotional escalation. The purpose of the court is not public catharsis. It's evidence. It's structure." Amara turned to face him. "Mr. Sharp," she said, "what you're witnessing is not an emotional escalation. It's a systemic unveiling. We are not here to maintain the illusion of structure. We are here to examine whether that structure has functioned as it should, and clearly it has not." He opened his mouth. She raised her hand. "Sit down." Outside, the chants had begun, not loud but rhythmic, like a heartbeat under stone. We see her. We believe her. We stand with her. The court clerk walked forward with a newly signed docket expansion. Amara stamped it, added her initials, then looked up one more time. This hearing will recess until 3:00 p.m. At that time, we will begin formal review of new testimonies and proceed with additional evidentiary inclusion. The gavel struck, this time not with finality, but with promise. A courtroom built for silence had now become a room made for truth. And for the first time in years, the people of Grantville walked out not with fear, but with fire. By 3:00 p.m., the courthouse felt more like a living organism than a building, its walls humming with energy, its halls vibrating with footsteps that no longer tiptoed around truth. The gallery had filled again, not just with spectators, but with citizens turned witnesses survivors, now stepping into the light, their silence left at the door. The defense table sat stiff, its members hunched in whispers and glances, paper rustling with unease rather than preparation. The prosecution, meanwhile, had doubled its clerks sorting through hours-old evidence like it had been unearthed from a vault. Cameras weren't allowed in the room, but that didn't matter. The story had already escaped the courtroom. What mattered now was what came next. Judge Amara Whitmore stepped through the private entrance and paused just behind the bench. She stood a moment, her hand resting lightly on the robe draped over her chair, then turned to face the courtroom, eyes steady, voice unshaken. Before we proceed with today's expanded docket, she said, "This court will enter into record a new policy initiative, effective immediately." She lifted a slim navy blue folder, its gold lettering embossed with two words, Whitmore Mandate. She opened it slowly, carefully, like one would reveal something sacred, something fought for. This mandate, she continued, will be implemented across the jurisdiction of this federal court and submitted for adoption at the district and circuit levels. She didn't blink. It includes 4 immediate provisions, 1 mandatory anti-bias training for all courthouse personnel, including marshals, clerks, and judges, 2 psychological screening at the time of hire and biennially thereafter with a zero-tolerance policy for unchecked aggression or racialized misconduct, 3 body camera installation in all secure screening zones with footage stored and audited by an external oversight board, and 4 public reporting of misconduct claims and complaint resolutions anonymized but accessible. The room didn't move. It barely breathed. Amara looked directly at the defense table. This court is no longer in the business of protecting optics at the expense of people. If that offends your sensibilities, you are welcome to appeal, but you will do so while the truth remains on record. She placed the folder gently on the desk beside her and tapped her gavel once. Now she said, "Let's proceed." The clerk called the next witness a woman in her late 30s named Jasmine Cross, a former courthouse interpreter. She recounted how Hale would mock her accent behind closed doors, tell officers to double-check her credentials every time she entered, and once told a detainee not to worry that she's one of ours, but barely. When she filed a complaint, she was told it must have been a misunderstanding, that she was probably being too sensitive. The day she quit, no one asked why. Her testimony wasn't explosive. It was methodical, clinical, devastating in its repetition. And it revealed what needed revealing, that Hale's behavior wasn't aberrant. It was embedded. Witness after witness followed. A mail clerk, a court translator, an elderly war veteran. Their stories overlap not in incident but in theme. Disrespect, dismissal, dehumanization, not loud enough to trigger alarm, just persistent enough to remind them, you do not belong. At 5:15 p.m., the final witness stepped down, and for the first time that day, the courtroom exhaled. Amara leaned forward. This court finds sufficient grounds to submit formal referrals to the Department of Justice for civil rights violations and obstruction of internal accountability procedures. These referrals will include Deputy Marshal Conrad Hale and any officials whose signatures appear on the now entered suppression documents. The defense attorney tried to rise again, one last attempt to salvage structure, but Amara didn't give him the chance. If your intention is to challenge the authority of this court to refer systemic violations for federal review, she said, you are welcome to file such a challenge. But I assure you it will fail. Outside, the chants had grown. Now they pulse like a drum line beneath the marble. Protect black women. Justice lives here. No more silence. Reporters flanked the doors. Drones hovered above the courtyard. One local station was broadcasting the summary in real time. Then Amara stood, not just from her chair, but from tradition. She stepped around the bench and stood at the center of the courtroom floor robe, still on voice unwavering. Let it be known, she said, that this court will not allow itself to be a monument to silence. Not while I sit in this seat. Not while my name stands beside this bench. She turned to the clerk. Schedule final statements for tomorrow. Notify the U.S. Attorney's Office that full cooperation is expected for transition into formal inquiry. And then just before recessing, she added something not written in the mandate. To those who came forward today, to those who spoke when it was hardest, know this, your voice changed something, and we are not going back. The gavel struck, not as punctuation, as promise. That night, Amara returned to her office. The halls were quiet again, but not in the old way. This quiet didn't feel like suppression. It felt like waiting, the kind that happens right before something begins. She sat at her desk, took off her robe, and ran a hand over her scalp. The uneven patches had already started to grow in. Slowly. Determined. She looked in the mirror not to check her reflection, but to face it. And in that reflection, she saw not just herself, but the hundreds behind her, around her, with her. She opened her drawer, pulled out the second copy of the Whitmore Mandate, and placed it gently into an envelope. On the label, she wrote, Office of the Chief Judge, 11th Circuit. She sealed it, stood, and walked it to the outbox herself. Then she locked her office door, stepped into the dim light of the corridor, and exhaled. Tomorrow the courtroom would open again, but it wouldn't be the same room anymore, and she would not be the same judge. The first session of the mandatory anti-bias training began 2 weeks after the Whitmore Mandate was officially enacted. It took place not in a grand courtroom or a polished conference suite, but in a converted jury deliberation room, its walls still lined with framed oil portraits of long retired judges, mostly white, all solemn. The lighting flickered slightly, and the chairs were too stiff, too close together, forcing proximity where discomfort already lingered like smoke. The room was full that morning. 43 courthouse personnel, deputy marshals, clerks, interpreters, security officers, even junior assistants. And at the front of the room stood Dr. Ramona King, a professor of institutional psychology, and a black woman with a gaze that could slice through pretense without ever raising her voice. She didn't start with a lecture. She started with silence. Before we begin, she said, placing her hands calmly on the podium, I want each of you to write down the first 3 words you think of when I say defendant. Protester. Black woman. Some blinked, some chuckled nervously. Others shifted in their chairs confused. One marshal scoffed. Is this what we're doing now? From the back corner, Officer Reyes, who had replaced Hale during the trial, lowered his eyes to his paper and wrote something. He didn't know what to feel exactly. He wasn't proud of Hale, but he had worked next to the man for 5 years and said nothing. What did that make him? Across the room, a court clerk named Valerie, mid-30s, Latina mother of 2, bit her lip as she wrote. She had never said anything cruel, never done anything wrong. But she'd laughed when Hale made a joke about one of the janitors. That laughter echoed in her ears, now louder than any slur. The sessions were mandatory 3 hours a week for 6 weeks. No skipping, no early exits. No passing the test without doing the work. Week 1, they reviewed the definition of bias, explicit, implicit, systemic. Week 2, they broke down real scenarios from their own courthouse, not hypotheticals, the real reports. Anonymous at first, then not. Week 3, they were asked to sit face to face, share personal histories, and listen. Not respond, not justify, just listen. By week 4, people stopped laughing. By week 5, they started confessing. It happened slowly. A file clerk admitted to always locking eyes with black men when walking past, even if they wore suits. A white female prosecutor confessed she used to double-check names on Spanish-speaking witnesses' forms out of habit. Officer Reyes, in a moment that made the room still, finally spoke. I thought I was just doing my job, he said, staring at the grain of the table. But now I think maybe I liked being invisible while someone else got hurt, because that meant I'd never be the one bleeding. Doctor. King nodded gently and let the silence linger. In the final session, Judge Whitmore herself entered the room. She didn't speak from the front. She sat with them in one of the plastic chairs, notebook on her lap, the regrowth of her hair now forming a tight halo of silver against her scalp. When asked to share her 3 words, she didn't hesitate. Strength, story, survival, she said. Then she paused and added, but those aren't the words the world gave me. I had to fight to replace them. The final hour was reserved for one question: what are you going to do differently now? The answers weren't loud. They were handwritten, sealed in envelopes, placed into a box marked accountability. Judge Whitmore carried that box back to her chambers herself. She didn't read them right away. She waited until the building emptied. Then she poured a glass of water, opened the first envelope, and began to read. I'll ask names before assuming. I'll speak when I used to laugh. I'll stop standing behind uniforms and start standing for people. I'll never forget her silence when he turned on the clippers. That silence is mine now, too. That night, Judge Whitmore didn't go home. She sat by the window in her office watching the last cleaning crew leave. One of them, an older man who had testified during the trial, looked up and saw her. He smiled. She nodded. No words. Just two people who knew something real had changed, not just in policy, not just in law, but in the marrow of the place. The walls still held history. The portraits still looked down from their frames. But now, when people walked into the Grantville courthouse, they didn't walk into a fortress of unchecked power. They walked into a place where even the walls had begun to listen, where transformation wasn't just an order from the bench, but a promise carried in every nameplate, every nod, every slow but deliberate step forward. The second pillar of the Whitmore mandate psychological screening at the time of hire and biennially thereafter was met with more resistance than the first. Not because people didn't understand its necessity, but because it forced them to look inward to be judged by standards they couldn't manipulate with clean resumes or practice neutrality. It meant facing questions not about what they had done, but who they were capable of becoming when no one was watching. The first wave of screenings began with new hires. Marshals, clerks, security officers required to complete a full psychological profile before onboarding. The assessments weren't surface-level questionnaires. They were structured interviews, behavioral simulations, trauma response evaluations, and implicit bias recognition tasks administered by third-party mental health professionals under strict federal neutrality guidelines. The second wave targeted existing staff. No exceptions. Not seniority, not tenure, not legacy. There was tension almost immediately. Deputy Marshal Brent Nolan, 10 years on the force, squared his jaw as he exited his interview room. Felt like I was on trial, he muttered to his colleague, tossing his evaluation packet onto the front desk. I serve with integrity. Always have. Now I gotta prove I'm not a damn threat. Behind him, the receptionist, an Indian-American woman named Nisha Patel, lowered her gaze. She remembered how just 3 months ago he'd joked about her accent while mispronouncing her name in front of a client. No one had laughed, but no one had stopped him either, until now. Others felt exposed in different ways. Elliot Graves, a new hire for document processing, was 24 and queer with a gentle voice and a history of social anxiety. He passed the screening but cried afterward, not out of fear, but relief. It was the first time I've ever been asked how I handle confrontation without someone assuming I'd run from it, he told Nisha quietly during lunch. They wanted to know if I'd stand up, not blow up. No one's ever framed strength that way for me before. The most significant moment came in week 5 of the rollout, when the report from the first cycle was released. Anonymous summaries, not names but patterns. The findings were sobering. A full 31% of staff showed elevated levels of authoritarian impulsivity under stress. Nearly 19% exhibited moderate to severe empathy suppression toward marginalized identity profiles in simulation, and 9% had previously undocumented behavioral flags that under the new standards would have triggered review at hiring. That was the quiet bomb. 9%, nearly 1 in 10. The courthouse paused. Some called it an overreach. Others called it finally calling the thing what it was. Judge Whitmore stood behind the data publicly. She hosted a town hall-style meeting in courtroom 3B open to all courthouse staff. There was no robe, no bench, just Amara in a black blouse and slacks standing behind the witness podium like she had something to testify to. This isn't about punishing people for being flawed, she said, voice calm but unflinching. This is about protecting people from unchecked aggression disguised as duty, from bias buried so deep you forgot it lived inside you. This is not an attack on your honor. This is the defense of ours. Some staff members wept quietly. Others sat with arms crossed, but all stayed. Following the report, 3 staff members, 2 marshals, and 1 assistant clerk were placed on extended administrative leave pending deeper review. 1 resigned without appeal. Another entered a voluntary counseling and training program offered under a new restorative justice initiative embedded in the mandate. The third fought it filed a grievance. It was denied. More importantly, the culture began to shift. New staff entered orientation not with warnings about who to avoid, but with trainings on how to de-escalate, how to question their own perceptions, how to carry authority without superiority. There was a language forming inside those walls, words like pause, repair, reflect, not just control, order, compliance. Even veteran officers started using them. Officer Reyes, once quiet and unsure, now led by example. When a teenager visiting the court on a civics field trip accidentally triggered a scanner alarm and froze in panic, Reyes didn't bark a command. He knelt slightly, palms open, and said, "It's okay. Just breathe. You're safe here." That moment didn't make headlines, but it rippled. A month later, a notice was posted in the break room. Biennial Screening Schedule Cycle A begins July 1st. Staff will be rotated across 4 weeks. Your presence is not optional. Your growth is not optional either. At the bottom, Judge Whitmore had added a handwritten note: "This isn't the end of accountability. It's the beginning of trust." And in that building, once marbled in silence, those words stuck like anchors. Because now every badge carried not just power, but proof. And no one wore that proof without earning it again, and again, and again. The third provision of the Whitmore mandate body camera installation in all secure screening zones with footage stored and audited by an external oversight board was ironically the most straightforward to implement technically, but the most disruptive culturally, because cameras don't lie, they don't look away, and they don't forget. The installation began on a rainy Thursday morning, 2 months after the hearings concluded. Contractors in gray coveralls moved through the courthouse under the quiet supervision of a representative from the Department of Justice, a young black woman named Camille Harris, with a digital clipboard and a voice like precise rainfall. She oversaw every angle, every mounting bracket, every corner of shadow that used to be unseen. "We don't leave blind spots," she said flatly to the chief facilities officer. "Not anymore." The first area wired was the north entrance screening room, the very one where Judge Amara Whitmore had been stripped of her dignity and her hair. The room hadn't changed much since that morning. Same steel chair, same white tiles, but now a small, unblinking lens was fixed in the top right corner, framed by a new placard on the wall. Notice this area is under 24/7 audio-visual surveillance. Footage is encrypted and stored off-site. Do not disable, block, or obstruct cameras. The presence of the camera did something immediate. The silence inside the room no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a warning to those who had relied on darkness. Not everyone was pleased. Deputy Marshal Nolan, the same officer who had grumbled through the bias training, was vocal about it. "We're not zoo animals," he said one morning while checking in an elderly woman. "Next thing you know, they'll be filming us while we use the bathroom." The woman who'd been quietly adjusting her scarf looked up at him and said, "If y'all had done your jobs with eyes before, maybe you wouldn't need lenses now." He said nothing after that. Others found unexpected comfort in the footage. Valerie, the clerk, once anxious about crossing the screening area alone after a late shift, now walked through with her head high. "It's not just the camera," she told a friend. "It's knowing someone will actually see what it sees." But the true power of the cameras came not from their presence, but from their use. Every Friday footage from the week was auto-uploaded to a secure third-party server managed by the Grantville Oversight Integrity Board, a newly formed body of 5, a retired judge, 2 civil rights attorneys, a trauma-informed psychologist, and 1 civilian appointed by the mayor. The board didn't just audit for abuse, they audited patterns, delays in screening based on appearance, use of excessive tone, inconsistency in application of protocols. Every anomaly was flagged, logged, and followed up. In month 1, they flagged 16 incidents of irregular escalation. In month 2, that number dropped to 8. By month 4, it was 3. Not 0, but 3. One of those 3 involved a rookie officer, Tasha Bennett, 26, former military, sharp instincts, short temper. A black teenager had panicked at the metal detector, backing up quickly and raising his hands in fear. Tasha responded by shouting at full volume, hand on her holster, escalating a simple sensor misfire into a near meltdown. The footage showed it all. The tremble in the boy's legs, the shake in her voice, the silence of the other officer who watched. The oversight board didn't fire her. They called her in. For 3 hours, Tasha sat with a trauma counselor, watched the footage twice, and wept. "I saw my own brother in that kid," she said, "and it scared the hell out of me. I didn't know what to do, so I reached for what I was trained to use: authority." The board offered her a choice: a disciplinary mark or a month in a de-escalation immersion course followed by peer-led field mentorship. She chose the latter. 6 months later, she became a trainer in that very program. The cameras didn't just catch misconduct, they caught change. In the 6th month, the footage recorded something different: an older white man yelling profanities at Officer Reyes after being asked to remove his belt. The man leaned in, hissed, "You people only got this job 'cause some judge got herself a sob story." The camera saw it. The board flagged it. But Reyes, he didn't flinch. He calmly de-escalated, processed the man without retaliating, and filed a full incident report with a timestamp. Later, when asked by the board why he didn't lose his temper, Reyes said, "I didn't have to. The lens had already heard everything I needed to say." In the end, the cameras changed more than conduct. They changed memory. There were no longer rumors about what did or didn't happen. There was record. There was accountability. And with that came something this courthouse had never truly known: clarity. At the close of the first year, the Oversight Board released a report titled "From Shadow to Standard: How Transparency Rebuilt Trust in Grantville Federal Courthouse." It detailed not just the statistics, but the stories, anonymous narratives of dignity defended of bias, interrupted of authority corrected. And in her chambers, Judge Amara Whitmore read every page. She paused at the final paragraph. "In a building once feared for its silence, we now listen through light." She looked out the window toward the north entrance, and for the first time she smiled, not because justice had arrived, but because it was being watched. The fourth and final provision of the Whitmore mandate, public reporting of misconduct claims and complaint resolutions anonymized but accessible, was the most radical in its simplicity. It didn't require cameras or labs or hours of training. It required something far more terrifying to the old guard: visibility. For the first time in the courthouse's long history, the public would be allowed to see behind the curtain, not to know who specifically had done wrong, but to finally understand what had been done, how often, and what, if anything, had been done about it. It began with a website. Simple, white background, blue text, built in partnership with the Department of Digital Justice Transparency Initiative. No ads, no fluff, just data. GrantvilleJustice.gov/misconduct. On launch day, a press release went live. All complaints of courthouse misconduct filed, resolved, dismissed, or ongoing will be posted here. Anonymized, timelined, tagged by category, updated monthly. No omissions, no exceptions. In the first 24 hours, over 18,000 unique visitors accessed the portal. The site showed summaries like this: date filed June 14th, 2022. Allegation: verbal harassment by courthouse security. Status: substantiated, action taken formal, written warning and transfer of officer to administrative post, pending review, or date filed November 3rd, 2020. Allegation: improper search during screening. Status: dismissed due to insufficient evidence. Review outcome: reopened for audit under Whitmore mandate. Each report included a 3-paragraph summary stripped of identifying information but rich in clarity. For the first time, citizens could trace a claim from beginning to end. See what happened. See if anything ever happened. Reactions came fast and loud. Some cried foul, claiming it violated staff privacy, even though all names had been scrubbed. Others praised it as overdue justice. A local pastor called it a digital confessional booth for a system that's been silent too long. The editorial board of the Grantville Gazette published a headline that read, "Accountability now has a homepage." But the real shift wasn't on the website. It was inside the building. People started checking the portal before filing complaints. And when they did file, they cited patterns. This seems similar to case #27. I believe this aligns with complaint from April 2021. They spoke with the language of precedent, of pattern, of evidence. A janitorial staff member, Miss Teresa Fells, quietly printed off summaries of 3 similar complaints and stapled them to her own written report before submitting it. It was the first time she had filed anything. I didn't think it would matter before she told the HR rep, but now I know I'm not the only one. Internally, the staff felt the difference too. Security Officer Nolan, once dismissive of the entire mandate, found himself checking the portal weekly, not to criticize, but to learn. "I'm trying to see what I missed," he told Officer Reyes, "before it ends up on there." Judge Whitmore made it policy that every complaint appearing 3 months in a row unresolved must be addressed in quarterly review. She read each one herself. She made handwritten notes, she circled patterns, and she asked the hardest question: who are we protecting when we bury these to guide the public? The Oversight Board released a tool called Complaint Compass, an interactive timeline that showed the frequency of claims by year, broken down by category: verbal harassment, physical misconduct bias, in treatment delayed response retaliation. It became a resource for schools, community organizers, even city council members. Not gossip, not accusation, just truth with timestamps. And with truth came pressure. A group of law students from a nearby college requested a meeting with the clerk's office. They asked how complaint categories were defined, who classified them, and whether community input could shape future categories. The answer: yes. The board began drafting new definitions for emotional intimidation and microaggression patterns based on feedback. It wasn't perfect. Some dismissed complaints still stung. Some victims still felt unheard. But now there was a record, a place to point, a light that didn't go out when the courtroom doors closed. By the end of the year, a new sign was installed in the courthouse lobby just beside the metal detector. You have the right to be treated with dignity. If you believe your rights were violated inside this courthouse, you can file a complaint at grantvillejustice.gov/misconduct or visit the Office of Public Review Room 103. This building belongs to the people. So does the truth. Some employees rolled their eyes when it went up. Others stared a long time. And one young visitor, a high school student on a civics field trip, paused at the sign, pulled out her phone, and typed the website into her notes. Not because anything had happened to her, but because she understood something. Now justice isn't just what happens inside the courtroom. It's what survives after the verdict. And now it was being watched, documented, remembered. Because when silence is replaced by record, the system doesn't just change. It can never pretend it didn't know. Finally, the Whitmore Mandate Reform Campaign is complete. The stage at the National Justice Forum in Washington, D.C. was awash in soft gold light. The seal of the Department of Justice projected behind the podium like a silent witness to a moment far bigger than ceremony. Rows of dignitaries, lawmakers, federal judges, civil rights leaders, and students filled the grand hall, the air humming with a reverent anticipation rarely felt in rooms built on tradition. The plaque read Presidential Medal for Justice and Civic Reform, a distinction given only 3 times in the last 2 decades. And this year, it bore one name: Judge Amara Whitmore. She stood backstage alone for a moment before the introduction, adjusting the subtle fall of her navy suit jacket, her scalp now crowned with short, proud coils of silver. She had chosen not to wear the robe today. She didn't need it. The weight of her work no longer came from cloth, but from consequence. A low chime signaled the host's final words. And now please welcome a woman whose courage cracked a silence that had festered for decades and whose reforms have become a blueprint for transparency across the nation. As the applause rose, Amara stepped forward, not quickly, not slowly, just fully present each step, a reminder that she wasn't walking onto a stage, but stepping into a legacy she never asked for, and now could no longer deny. She didn't smile, not yet. She simply nodded once, took her place at the podium, and began. "I wasn't supposed to be here," she said plainly. Not because I lacked the qualifications or the commitment, but because most systems, especially the ones wrapped in marble and tradition, aren't built for women like me to survive, let alone lead. The room was still. When I first entered the courthouse in Grantville, I was asked for my ID. When I presented it, I was ignored. When I asserted my identity, I was violated. And when I was silenced, I chose to speak through the only language the system understands: accountability. She paused, her voice steady. The Whitmore Mandate wasn't born from ambition. It was born from injury. And it wasn't written in theory. It was written in loss, in courage, and in the hands of a community that said, "Not this time." The projection behind her shifted, now showing a photo of the Grantville courthouse steps lined with peaceful protesters, children holding signs that read, "Justice lives here." Amara glanced at the image, then back at the crowd. I didn't change the system. We did. And we're not finished. But it wasn't the speech that stayed with the audience. It was what followed. As the screen darkened, a short video clip began to play. It was grainy shot from a classroom phone camera. A student, maybe 15, stood beside her desk. Brown skin, round glasses, and a voice barely above a whisper. "Judge Whitmore," she asked, "do you still believe in justice?" The question cut through the air like it had waited years to be asked. The room fell into a hush. The video continued. Amara sat in a plastic chair surrounded by middle schoolers with wide eyes and note-filled folders. She smiled softly, not performatively, but like someone who had waited a long time to be asked something that mattered. "No," she answered slowly. "I don't believe in what justice was. I believe in what we're building it to become, and I believe in people like you asking that question. That's how it starts." The screen faded to black. No music, no applause, just silence, until someone near the back began to clap slowly, sincerely. And then another. Then the room stood not as an ovation, but as acknowledgement. Amara bowed her head once, then stepped away from the podium. Later at the reception, surrounded by flashes and accolades, she moved quietly, politely, but always watching. She met with state justices, with educators, with community organizers. But the only conversation that lingered came from a corner near the refreshment table. It was the girl from the video. Her name was Tamia Ellis, now a first-year high school student invited to D.C. as part of a civic leaders mentorship program. She approached Amara hesitantly, still holding the notebook she'd carried during the classroom visit. "You remember me?" she asked. Amara turned, her expression softening instantly. "I never forgot," she said. "You asked the right question." Tamia handed her a folded sheet of notebook paper. "I wrote something," she said, "for my civics class, but it's really for you." Amara unfolded it, read the first few lines, then looked up. "You want to be a judge?" Tamia shook her head. "I want to be the person who helps judges tell the truth. Like you did." Amara took her hand. No speech, no inspiration, just a look. One generation seeing the next. That night, back in her hotel room, Amara sat at the window, overlooking the city. Her award rested on the desk behind her, its inscription catching the light, but she didn't turn to look at it. She was focused on the street below, people walking home from work, kids riding scooters, sirens in the distance, music echoing from a rooftop bar. The world didn't stop for justice. It never had. But now, it noticed. She reached for her phone and opened the portal to the misconduct report site. It was updated just that afternoon. 4 new entries, 1 resolved, 1 reopened, 2 under review. She closed the app, exhaled, and whispered to no one, "We're not finished." Because justice wasn't a plaque. It wasn't a headline. It was a choice. Every day, in every hallway, in every question asked by a 15-year-old girl who dared to want something better. And now, thanks to one woman who stood her ground on a cold courthouse floor with shorn hair and fire in her chest, justice had a new voice. Not perfect, but becoming. The story of Judge Amara Whitmore was more than a tale of one woman standing against a system. It was a wake-up call. A lesson written not in theory, but in blood silence and unwavering courage. Her journey reminded us that dignity is not something given by others. It is something we protect ourselves, especially when the world tries to strip it away. She didn't rise through anger. She rose through clarity, through truth, and through a fierce, unshakable belief that justice must belong to everyone, not just the privileged few. Through her eyes, we saw what it means to confront injustice, not just with boldness, but with structure. To rebuild trust, not with words, but with systems that remember. Her story showed us that power doesn't lie in the badge, the bench, or the robe it lives in. Integrity, in accountability, in the relentless pursuit of what is right, even when it's not easy. And now, we want to hear from you. If you were in Amara's shoes, facing down humiliation, betrayal, systemic failure, would you have the courage to rise anyway? Would you choose to rebuild something better, not just for yourself, but for everyone who never got the chance? What does justice mean to you, and how far would you go to protect it? Let's talk about it. Comment down below. What would you have done in Amara's place? Which moment from her journey moved you the most? What kind of justice do you think the world still needs to fight for? If this story stirred something inside you, if it made you reflect, question, or simply hope, then please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel. By doing that, you're helping us build a community that believes in storytelling with purpose, stories that don't just entertain, but ignite. Thank you for standing with us. Thank you for believing that change is possible. And thank you for remembering that the loudest kind of power isn't always the one that shouts. It's the one that stands and doesn't move.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.